My sister raised her glass at her extravagant baby shower and told a room of 50 people that she pitied me. She laughed and said at least her baby would have a father unlike my son who was sitting right next to me. The guests actually clapped. My mother chimed in saying some women just make bad choices. Then my 9-year-old son stood up and asked a single question that made the entire room freeze. He asked if he should tell everyone about Uncle Darnell and his other family. I am Cassidy, 33 years old, and my family has always treated me like a burden. But they had no idea I was a senior forensic accountant who hunts white-collar criminals for a living. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set firm boundaries with toxic relatives. The baby shower was held in the grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge Country Club, a venue that practically screamed new money. There were towering arrangements of white hydrangeas on every table, a string quartet playing softly in the corner, and a dessert table covered in custom pastries that probably cost more than my first car. My younger sister Sydney was 30 years old and pregnant with her first child. She was holding court in the center of the room, wearing a silk maternity dress that highlighted her perfectly round belly. Beside her stood her husband Darnell, a 34-year-old African-American man who played the role of the wealthy, charismatic executive flawlessly. He wore a tailored suit, flashed a bright smile at every guest, and constantly kept a protective hand on the small of Sydney's back. To my parents, he was the absolute gold standard of a son-in-law. I sat at a table near the back with my 9-year-old son, Leo. We were technically family, but the seating arrangement made it clear that we were second-class citizens. I wore a simple professional navy dress, focusing all my attention on making sure Leo was comfortable. We had spent my entire adult life dealing with my family's condescension. To them, I was just a low-level number cruncher struggling to make ends meet. They had no idea about my actual corporate title or my real net worth, and I preferred it that way. The afternoon had been filled with endless bragging from my parents, Patricia and Richard. They paraded Darnell around the room, introducing him to their country club friends as a real estate investment prodigy. When the time came for speeches, the room quieted down. Waiters poured champagne for the guests and sparkling cider for the mother-to-be. Sydney took the microphone, tapping her manicured fingernails against her glass to ensure everyone was paying attention. She thanked her friends, she thanked my parents for funding the lavish event, and she spent a solid 5 minutes praising Darnell for being her rock. Then her gaze shifted across the room and locked onto me. Her bright camera-ready smile morphed into a smirk. "I also want to take a moment to be grateful for what I have," Sydney announced, her voice echoing through the ballroom speakers. "Because not everyone is so lucky. Look at my sister Cassidy. It breaks my heart to see her here as a pitiful single mom, carrying the burden of raising a child all alone. I am just so blessed that my baby will actually have a father present. At least my baby will not grow up wondering why their dad left." The silence in the room was heavy, thick with secondhand embarrassment. But then a few of Sydney's wealthy friends chuckled. Someone at the front table actually clapped. My face burned not with shame, but with a cold, simmering rage. I looked down at Leo. He was clutching his fork, his small knuckles turning white, understanding perfectly well that his aunt had just insulted our entire existence. I did not cry. I reached over, took a linen napkin, and calmly wiped a crumb of frosting from Leo's mouth. I kept my posture completely straight. Before I could even formulate a response, my mother, Patricia, stepped up to the microphone to stand beside her golden child. She placed a hand on Sydney's shoulder and looked directly at me with eyes full of judgment. "It is just the hard truth, Cassidy," my mother said, her voice amplifying the humiliation for everyone to hear. "Some women just make bad choices. You chose poorly, and now you have to live with the consequences." But Sydney and Darnell did things the right way. My father Richard stood up from his seat at the head table and raised his glass high. He nodded toward his son-in-law with absolute reverence. "Darnell just closed a $5 million real estate fund last week," my father boomed proudly. "That is what a real man provides for his family. He builds an empire. He does not run away from his responsibilities. We are so proud to have a true leader in the family, unlike the failures we have had to tolerate in the past." The guests murmured their approval, raising their glasses to Darnell, who offered a humble, practiced nod. He looked like the picture of integrity. But looking at his polished shoes and his expensive watch, I felt a familiar analytical part of my brain kick into high gear. I investigate financial fraud for a living. I read people, and I read their money. And Darnell always struck me as a man whose numbers simply did not add up. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. The scrape of the wooden legs against the marble floor echoed loudly. I smoothed down my dress and met my mother's harsh glare without flinching. My bad choice was refusing to stay with a man who put his hands on me in anger, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent ballroom. I left an abusive marriage to protect my son. I walked away with nothing so that Leo would not grow up thinking violence was normal. If you call protecting your child a bad choice, because it does not come with a $5 million bank account, then your priorities are completely bankrupt. My mother scoffed, rolling her eyes in disgust. She waved her hand dismissively as if my trauma was just an annoying inconvenience. Always so dramatic, Patricia sneered. You always have an excuse for why you cannot keep a man or hold down a prestigious job. You are just jealous because Darnell can actually provide for your sister while you struggle to pay your rent. I looked at Darnell. He was staring at me, a tight artificial smile plastered on his face. He thought he was untouchable. He thought my parents' blind adoration made him invincible. He thought I was just a bitter, exhausted single mother who would sit quietly and take their abuse. I gripped Leo's hand gently, preparing to simply walk out of this toxic environment and leave them to their illusions. But I underestimated my son. I underestimated how fiercely a 9-year-old boy could love his mother and how closely he had been paying attention to the world around him. Leo let go of my hand. He stepped out from behind our table, standing tall in his little suit. He looked straight past my parents, straight past the towering floral centerpieces, and locked eyes with the man of the hour, the golden son-in-law, the $5 million man. And right then, the true destruction of my family's perfect facade began. Aunt Sydney, should I tell everyone about Uncle Darnell's other family? Leo's high, clear voice cut through the stifling air of the ballroom like a crack of thunder. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. Even the string quartet in the corner abruptly stopped playing, the cellist dragging his bow across the strings with an awful, discordant screech. At the head table, the color completely drained from Darnell's face. His jaw went slack. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling fingers and plummeted to the floor. The sharp, explosive crash of shattering glass echoed across the quiet room, sending a spray of sparkling cider across the polished marble and onto the hem of Sydney's expensive maternity dress. "What did you just say?" Sydney shrieked. Her hands flew to her pregnant belly, her eyes darting frantically between her husband and my 9-year-old son. "What kind of sick joke is this?" I put my hand on Leo's shoulder, feeling the slight tremble in his small frame, but he held his ground. He pointed a steady finger directly at Darnell. "I saw him on Tuesday," Leo stated, his voice unwavering. "When Mom picked me up from school, we drove past the park on Elm Street. Uncle Darnell was there with a lady and 2 little girls. He kissed the lady on the mouth and pushed the girls on the swings. They called him Daddy." The ballroom erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers. 50 wealthy country club guests leaned in, exchanging scandalous glances and frantic murmurs. Matrons in pearl necklaces gasped behind their manicured hands. Men in tailored suits leaned across their tables, muttering about how they always knew something was off about the guy. The pristine high society image my parents had paid thousands of dollars to project was disintegrating in real time. Darnell was unraveling rapidly. The cool, confident chief executive persona vanished in a matter of seconds. A thick sheen of sweat broke out across his forehead. He aggressively tugged at the collar of his tailored suit as if it were suddenly choking him. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a silk handkerchief, and dabbed frantically at his brow, his eyes darting toward the exit doors like a trapped animal calculating an escape route. "That is an absolute lie," Patricia screamed. My mother slammed both of her hands flat onto the head table, rattling the expensive silverware and knocking over a floral centerpiece. She stormed across the ballroom floor, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble. She stopped mere inches from me, her face flushed dark red with absolute fury. She pointed a shaking accusatory finger directly at my chest. "You put him up to this, Cassidy." Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. "You could not stand the fact that your sister is happy. You could not stand that she married a successful, wealthy man, while you are a miserable failure. So you brainwashed your own child." You taught him to spread vile, disgusting lies, just to ruin the most important day of Sydney's life out of sheer bitter jealousy. I did not teach him anything. I replied, my voice dangerously calm. I stepped squarely in front of Leo, shielding him from my mother's physical wrath. My son does not lie. If he says he saw Darnell playing house at the park, then that is exactly what happened. Perhaps you should be interrogating your golden son-in-law instead of attacking a 9-year-old boy. Richard charged over to join my mother, his face a mask of authoritarian outrage. He glared down at me, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. You are a disgrace to this family, Richard barked. Darnell was in a board meeting all day on Tuesday closing his real estate fund. He told us so himself. To weaponize a child's imagination because you are financially unstable and envious is a new low even for you. I stared right into my father's eyes, refusing to shrink back. A board meeting. Is that what he told you? Because from where I am standing, Darnell looks like he is about to pass out. Every eye in the room pivoted back to Darnell. He was practically hyperventilating. He grabbed a cloth napkin from the table and wiped his neck again, forcing out a nervous, high-pitched laugh that sounded completely unhinged and utterly desperate. This is a massive misunderstanding, Darnell stammered, holding his hands up defensively toward the crowd of whispering guests. Sydney, baby, listen to me. The boy is confused. He just saw me having a brief outdoor lunch with a prospective client, a female business partner. She brought her kids along, that is all. A business partner you kiss on the mouth, I challenged loudly, making sure the entire room heard every single syllable. It was a cheek kiss. A European greeting, Darnell yelled back, his voice cracking under the pressure. He turned desperately to my parents, his eyes wide with fake panic. Richard, Patricia, you know me. You know I have been working around the clock to secure this $5 million fund for our family's future. I would never disrespect Sydney. The kid just saw a friendly hug and his mother twisted it into a sick narrative to destroy us. Sydney burst into loud theatrical tears. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, while Darnell wrapped his arms around her, playing the part of the fiercely protective, wrongfully accused husband. The guests were openly staring now, the whispers growing into a loud hum. Some were pulling out their phones, rapidly texting the juicy gossip to anyone not in attendance. The tension in the air was so thick, it was suffocating. My parents were visibly panicking as they watched their social standing crumble before their very eyes. They cared more about what the country club members thought than they did about the possibility of my sister being married to a fraud. Cassidy, fix this right now, Patricia ordered, grabbing my arm and squeezing it hard enough to bruise. You will make that boy walk up to the microphone, and you will make him admit he made the whole thing up. You will make him apologize to Darnell in front of everyone, or so help me, you are dead to this family. I yanked my arm out of my mother's grip with enough force to make her stumble back a step. I looked at the angry, desperate faces of my parents, then at Sydney's fake tears, and finally at Darnell's sweating, terrified expression. They wanted a public retraction. They wanted me to force my brave, observant son to kneel at the altar of their delusions to protect a con artist. They were demanding that I sacrifice my child's integrity to save their fragile egos. Darnell seemed to sense my temporary silence and completely misinterpreted it as submission. He suddenly straightened his posture, pulling his shoulders back as he summoned every ounce of his polished corporate charm. He tucked the damp handkerchief back into his pocket and shot a sickeningly warm, forgiving smile toward the crowd. He was shifting seamlessly back into his role as the untouchable executive, ready to spin the narrative in his favor. Ladies and gentlemen, please. Darnell projected his voice across the ballroom, adopting the smooth, measured cadence he likely used in boardroom pitches. Let us take a collective breath here. We are family. And in families, sometimes emotions run high, especially when certain members are dealing with personal hardships. He stepped away from the head table and walked slowly toward the center of the room, holding his hands out in a gesture of absolute transparency. I run a real estate investment firm, Darnell announced to the room, making sure to make eye contact with the wealthiest guests. Closing a $5 million fund requires round-the-clock dedication. It means breakfast meetings, dinner negotiations, and yes, occasionally meeting a prospective lead developer at a public park because she cannot find a babysitter for her 2 daughters. The woman Leo saw is a highly respected architect. The kiss he thinks he witnessed was nothing more than a customary European cheek kiss after we finalized a massive zoning contract. A collective sigh of relief washed over the ballroom. The wealthy matrons nodded in understanding, their pearls returning to rest against their collarbones. The businessmen chuckled, murmuring about the stress of closing big deals. Darnell was reeling them back in, feeding them the exact comfortable lie they wanted to hear. He was incredibly good at this. To twist the knife, Darnell turned his gaze toward me and Leo. His eyes were cold, but his voice was drenched in artificial pity. Leo is a bright kid, Darnell continued, placing a hand over his heart. But he is a little boy growing up without a male role model. It is natural for a child in his unfortunate situation to crave drama or misinterpret normal professional boundaries. I do not blame him. And Cassidy, I do not blame you either. Being a single mother is a heavy burden, and I know financial stress can make people say hurtful, irrational things. I forgive you both. Sydney let out a dramatic, trembling breath and rested her head on Darnell's shoulder. The crowd literally hummed with admiration for his unbelievable grace and maturity. He had completely flipped the script. He was the benevolent patriarch forgiving the unhinged, jealous spinster sister. My father, emboldened by Darnell's masterful performance and the crowd's shifting allegiance, marched directly up to our table. The veins in Richard's neck were bulging. He pointed a rigid finger toward the small stage where the microphone stood. "You see the grace this man possesses?" Richard hissed at me, his voice a low, threatening rumble meant only for my ears. "He just saved your miserable reputation. Now it is your turn to fix the damage you caused." "What exactly do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "I want you to take that boy by the hand, walk up to that microphone, and apologize to Darnell and Sydney in front of everyone in this room," Richard commanded. "You will tell them that Leo has a hyperactive imagination. You will admit that your own struggles have made you bitter, and you will thank Darnell for his forgiveness. You will do it right now, Cassidy, or you will pack your things, leave this club, and never speak to us again." Patricia flanked him, her eyes practically bulging with desperation. "Do it, Cassidy. For once in your life, put your family first. Fix this. Save our face." I looked down at Leo. My brave, intelligent 9-year-old son was watching me closely. He knew what he saw. He knew the truth. He was waiting to see if his mother would force him to swallow a lie to appease people who despised us. I crouched down so I was eye level with my son. I placed both of my hands firmly on his small shoulders. "Leo," I said, making sure my voice was steady and loud enough for my parents to hear, "did you tell the truth today?" "Yes, Mom," he answered without a single ounce of hesitation. "I told the truth." "I know you did," I said, offering him a proud smile. "And I will never, ever make you apologize for being honest." I stood back up, towering over my mother and meeting my father's furious glare with absolute ice. I reached out and took Leo's hand, lacing my fingers through his tightly. "I am not walking up to that stage," I told my father, articulating every word with razor-sharp precision. "I am not taking that microphone. And I am absolutely not forcing my child to grovel at the feet of a pathological liar, just so you can keep your standing at a country club. Cassidy." "I am warning you," Richard growled, taking a step forward to physically intimidate me. "Save your warnings." I shot back, stepping right into his personal space. "You want to talk about bad choices? Your bad choice was believing that wealth and a shiny suit equal character. Your bad choice was throwing your own daughter under the bus to protect a man who is treating your golden child like a stepping stone." Sydney gasped loudly from the head table. "How dare you? Darnell loves me. He provides for me." "He provides an illusion, Sydney," I yelled back across the room, dropping all pretense of keeping my voice down. "And all of you are eating it up because you are too obsessed with status to do a simple background check." Patricia grabbed my shoulder, her fingernails digging into my skin. "You are insane," she shrieked. "You are a jealous, unhinged woman, Security. Someone call security and have her thrown out." I brushed my mother's hand off my shoulder with a sharp, dismissive swipe. "Do not bother calling security. We are leaving. I would not subject my son to another minute of this pathetic circus anyway." I turned to face the entire room. The guests were staring in stunned silence once again. The fake piece Darnell had manufactured was entirely shattered. I looked directly at Darnell, whose confident CEO mask was beginning to slip once more. His eyes darted nervously as he realized I was not backing down, not apologizing, and certainly not retreating in shame. I gripped Leo's hand tightly and prepared to deliver the final blow before walking out those doors, ready to hit Darnell where I knew it would hurt the absolute most. "You are done in this family," Patricia shrieked, stepping directly into my path before I could move toward the golden son-in-law. "Do you hear me? If you walk out those doors without getting on your knees and begging for your sister's forgiveness, you are cut off forever. Do not call us on holidays. Do not come crying to us when your pathetic little paycheck runs out. You and your son will get absolutely nothing from our estate. You are entirely disowned." Richard nodded firmly, standing shoulder to shoulder with my mother like a pair of guards, defending a crumbling castle. He crossed his arms over his chest, his face purple with absolute indignation. "Your mother is entirely serious, Cassidy. You have embarrassed us in front of the most elite members of the Oak Ridge Country Club. We gave you everything and you repay us with petty, unhinged jealousy. If you take one more step toward the exit without apologizing, consider yourself an orphan." I looked at the two people who had spent my entire 33 years of life treating me like a disappointing afterthought. They genuinely believed that cutting me off from their toxic approval and their conditional wealth was the ultimate punishment. They actually thought the threat of being disowned would make me collapse in fear. "I am not afraid of losing a family that never really wanted me," I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the frozen ballroom. "And I certainly do not need a single dime of your money. You should probably hold on to it anyway. You are going to need every penny to pay for the massive legal fees heading your way." Before my parents could comprehend the meaning behind my words, I bypassed them completely. I strode directly up to the head table, pulling Leo along with me. Darnell tried to maintain his confident posture, but as I invaded his personal space, I saw the microscopic tremors in his hands. The polished, charismatic executive was gone. Up close, I could smell the stale sweat masking his expensive cologne. He forced a patronizing smile, trying to play to the audience of wealthy onlookers one last time. "Listen, Cassidy," Darnell said, keeping his voice artificially gentle. "We can get you help. There are therapists who can work with you on these delusions. I am willing to pay for your treatment." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to scream or cry to tear his world apart. Instead, I leaned in extremely close, invading his space until I was mere inches from his ear. I made sure my voice was just loud enough for my parents and Sydney to hear every single syllable clearly. "This family loves living in an illusion," I whispered, watching the muscles in his jaw tighten defensively. "But Darnell, you cannot charm a bank ledger. You might want to check your offshore shell accounts in the Caymans, the ones you registered under the dummy corporation last month. You know, the accounts where you have been funneling the investor capital you swore was going into local real estate developments. You might want to log in and see if the money is still there." Darnell stopped breathing. It was as if I had driven a physical blade straight through his ribs. The smug, condescending smile instantly vanished from his lips. His eyes widened in absolute, unfiltered terror. I did not stop. I knew exactly how to twist the knife, using the precise financial terminology that would confirm I was not just guessing. I was hunting. "Because wire transfers leave digital footprints, Darnell." I continued, keeping my tone perfectly measured and cold. "And shifting funds through 3 different international routing numbers does not make you a genius. It just makes you a federal target. I suggest you hold on to your passport tightly. You are going to need a very good defense attorney when the audit hits." The physiological reaction was instantaneous and severe. Darnell's face turned the color of wet ash. The last remaining drops of blood drained completely from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. His knees actually buckled slightly, forcing him to grip the edge of the table to keep himself from collapsing onto the marble floor. He stared at me, his eyes wide and completely stripped of his usual arrogance. He was looking at a predator, and he finally realized he was the prey. "What are you talking about?" Sydney demanded, her voice shrill and panicked, as she watched her husband physically crumble before her eyes. "Darnell, what is she saying? What offshore accounts?" Darnell could not answer her. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just stared at me, paralyzed by the realization that I knew his deepest, darkest financial secrets. He was entirely exposed. Richard stepped forward, his authoritarian bravado faltering as he witnessed the unmistakable guilt written all over his son-in-law's ashen face. "Cassidy, what kind of nonsense are you making up now? What are you implying about Darnell's business? I am not implying anything, Dad, I replied, turning my back on the terrified con artist. I am stating a fact. Enjoy the rest of the baby shower. I hear the cake is expensive. Try to savor it before the subpoenas arrive. I did not wait for another response. I did not look back at my mother's gaping mouth or my sister's panicked, tear-stained face. I tightened my grip on Leo's hand, gave him a small, reassuring smile, and turned toward the grand double doors of the ballroom. We walked down the center aisle with perfect posture and absolute dignity. The crowd of wealthy country club guests parted for us like the Red Sea. No one dared to speak. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of my heels against the polished floor. Behind us, the illusion was shattering. The golden son-in-law was hyperventilating at the head table. The perfect daughter was shrieking questions he could not answer. My parents were standing frozen in the wreckage of their precious social standing. We left the party engulfed in a state of confused, buzzing tension. The whispers ignited the second the ballroom doors swung shut behind us. I walked out into the bright, crisp afternoon air, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I had spent 33 years suffocating under the crushing pressure of my family's toxic expectations. I had endured their insults, their dismissals, and their relentless cruelty. But walking across that asphalt parking lot toward my car, I felt nothing but absolute freedom. Mom, Leo asked, looking up at me as I unlocked the doors. Are we in trouble? No, sweetheart, I said, opening the passenger door for him. We are not in trouble at all. But Uncle Darnell is about to have a very bad week. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away from the Oak Ridge Country Club without a single glance in the rearview mirror. The opening shot had been fired. My family had officially drawn the battle lines, assuming they could crush me with a few harsh words and threats of disownment. They had no idea that by trying to bury me, they had just handed me the shovel I would use to dig their financial graves. The war had just begun, and I was holding all the winning cards. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my townhouse, my phone was vibrating so violently against the center console, it sounded like a jackhammer. I ignored it. My only priority was getting Leo inside, making him a grilled cheese sandwich, and settling him on the couch with his favorite video game. I needed him completely insulated from the fallout. He had been brave today, incredibly brave, and I was not going to let my family's toxic meltdown touch his peace of mind. Once he was happily distracted and safe, I stepped into my home office, locked the door behind me, and finally pulled my phone from my purse. The notification screen was a wall of aggressive red alerts. There were 84 missed messages in the family group chat alone. I unlocked the screen and watched the sheer panic and venom pour out in digital format. Sydney was leading the charge, her texts arriving in erratic blocks of capital letters. She claimed the stress of my quote-unquote psychotic breakdown at the country club had caused her to experience severe false contractions. According to her dramatic self-serving timeline, Darnell had to rush her straight from the baby shower to the emergency room to save her pregnancy. She then uploaded a photo of a hospital invoice. The text beneath it read, "You owe us $10,000 for out-of-network emergency fees. If you do not wire this money by tomorrow morning, my lawyer is suing you for intentional infliction of emotional distress." I stared at the photo of the invoice and let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a spectacular failure of a forgery. Sydney had clearly downloaded a generic medical billing template from the internet. She used the wrong diagnostic codes for obstetric emergencies. The dates did not even align properly, and she had typed the hospital address using a completely different font size than the rest of the document. She actually thought she could scam me with a piece of paper that would not pass a middle school graphic design class. Her desperation was almost comical, but the messages rolling in beneath the fake bill were far more sinister. I switched over to my voicemails. My mother, Patricia, had left 4 consecutive messages in the span of 30 minutes. I hit play on the first one and set the phone flat on my desk. Patricia's voice echoed in the quiet room, shrill and completely unhinged. "Cassidy, you are a monster!" Patricia screamed into the receiver. "Your sister is in a hospital bed because of your vile, jealous lies. Darnell is completely devastated. You are an unfit, toxic mother raising a pathological liar. If you do not transfer that medical money to Sydney right now and issue a public apology to Darnell, I am calling Child Protective Services. I will tell them you are mentally unstable and coaching your son to spread malicious slander. We will take Leo away from you. You will lose everything. The recording clicked off. The silence in my office felt heavy. A threat to call Child Protective Services was the ultimate red line. My mother thought dangling the loss of my child over my head would make me fold. She thought I was the same terrified, financially dependent girl I was in my 20s, the one she could bully into submission. She thought her empty threats carried weight. She was severely mistaken. The threat against my son did not make me panic. It just erased whatever microscopic shred of guilt I had left about destroying them. I did not reply to a single text. I did not return a single frantic phone call. I simply switched my phone to airplane mode and tossed it into my desk drawer. Let them scream into the void. Let them exhaust themselves trying to force a reaction out of me. I had actual work to do. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and pressed the power button on my heavy-duty encrypted workstation. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dual monitors I used for my actual career. The career my family thought was just low-level bookkeeping. I am a senior forensic accountant for one of the largest corporate intelligence firms in the United States. My entire professional existence revolves around hunting down white-collar criminals, unspooling complex embezzlement schemes, and tearing apart fraudulent corporations brick by brick. Darnell thought he was dealing with a gullible amateur. He had no idea he had just picked a fight with an apex predator in the financial food chain. I bypassed my standard work portal and logged directly into the federal and state financial databases. I pulled up the Securities and Exchange Commission filings. I typed in the name of Darnell's supposed $5 million real estate fund. Nothing but glaring red flags instantly flooded my screen. I cross-referenced the employer identification numbers I had memorized from my earlier informal digging. I pulled up the offshore corporate registries in the Cayman Islands. I traced the registered agents, mapped the wire transfers, and ran deep background checks on Darnell's numerous corporate aliases. The data told a brutal, undeniable story. There was no real estate empire. There were no legitimate commercial developers. It was a classic, aggressively sloppy Ponzi scheme. Darnell was funneling the cash straight into dummy accounts to fund his luxury lifestyle, his tailored suits, and the expensive facade he used to fool my status-obsessed parents. My fingers flew across the keyboard, downloading every single document, every shady wire transfer, every fake tax return he had filed. I mapped the flow of stolen money with ruthless precision. I gathered the digital evidence of his shell companies, proving that the wealth he flaunted at the country club was built entirely on stolen capital. I was building a digital guillotine, and I was going to make sure the blade was perfectly sharp before I dropped it. My family wanted a war. They wanted to threaten my son and demand money I supposedly owed them. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for, but the cost was going to be their entire reality. I closed my laptop the next morning just as the sun began to peek through the blinds of my home office. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but my mind was completely clear. I had spent the entire night archiving Darnell's financial footprints, building a fortress of evidence that no lawyer on earth could dismantle. I showered, made Leo his favorite blueberry pancakes for breakfast, and dropped him off at school as if it were just another ordinary Tuesday. I needed to maintain absolute normalcy. I knew my family would be waiting for me to crack, expecting me to call them crying and begging for forgiveness. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a single word. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I drove back to the elementary school to pick up Leo from his after-school robotics club. The parking lot was a chaotic maze of minivans and crossing guards. I parked my SUV near the back edge of the lot, enjoying the crisp autumn air as I stepped out of the vehicle.